Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast, your source for insights and ideas on how to lead your church in the 21st century. At the Future Christian Podcast, we talk to pastors, authors, and other faith leaders for helpful advice and practical wisdom to help you and your community of faith walk boldly into the future. Whether you're a pastor, church leader, or a passionate member of your faith community, this podcast is designed to challenge, inspire, and equip you with the tools you need for impactful ministry. And now for a little bit about the guest for this episode.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. Today, Lauren Richmond Jr. welcomes Megan Bissell to the show. Megan is the co-founder of Future of Faith and an applied sociologist and researcher who specializes in the lives of young people, relationships, and group dynamics. She has spent her career turning research into actionable insights that people can use to make a meaningful impact. She has extensive experience in leading research, facilitating workshops and educational programs, and consulting with organizations who want to enhance their relational and organizational dynamics. Megan was previously head of research for both the Social Research Lab at the University of Northern Colorado and then at Springtide Research Institute. She served as the vice president for research at the National Catholic Educational Association. Megan lives in Greeley, Colorado, with her family of creatives, where she has no choice but to be inspired by those around her. One housekeeping detail before our conversation begins. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast, leave a review, and share Future Christian with a friend. Your engagement helps to ensure that these important conversations about navigating and resourcing the future of the church continue and reach more people.
Welcome to the Future Christian Podcast. I'm here with Megan Bissell, and we're recording live and in person from the High Plains Library in Fort Lupton, Colorado. Pretty cool place. This is a nice place. If you're watching on video, we have a cool little room we're recording in. But anyway, thanks for being here. Thanks for meeting me. We met kind of halfway in the middle between where we both live. So looking forward to having this conversation. Let's just start out with the main stuff. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your story, your faith journey, all that.
Yeah. So, my story is that I'm originally from the Chicagoland area. I grew up Catholic, in a very small town, Catholic church, that I've actually reconnected with people from that diocese recently, which is really weird because it was New Lenox, Illinois. But I was, it was really traditional Catholic upbringing, but my parents made all the difference with that because they were actually youth leaders for the Catholic Church. My dad taught confirmation classes because he loves middle schoolers, which I then adopted that same insanity loving middle school.
Yes,
it's my group.
Yes.
And they were just really involved in the youth and teen part of it. So that was my main experience with Christianity. I didn't fully understand the difference between what it meant to be Catholic.
Right.
Back then it was like you go to church, you do the youth group, that's what it meant to be in church. And then, I really didn't stick with it. The youth group was really impactful. I still am friends with those people that we had. It was, big questions. And the thing I remember the most were that, my parents weren't afraid to just allow questions to happen. And I didn't experience that anywhere else in the church experience. It was pretty specific to them just allowing us to be curious and enjoy it and have questions and not have all the answers. So that was my original experience with being Christian. Fast forward through all of my adolescence, my husband and I moved to Colorado, and we happened upon a church that I think had Baptist roots, but we're not really sure because it didn't have a lot of, they didn't talk about denomination much. It was real super artsy and, it was teachers and college kids and artists. And, it was really about the community. Like it went from, a structured Catholic upbringing to this place of just loving people. And that is then how I have really shaped and formed my Christian experience.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
What are some spiritual practices or spiritual disciplines you do that are meaningful for you?
Oh, I'm terrible at this, actually. Consistency is a real thing, but I really find that I will look for moments of peace where I feel like I'm just having a conversation with God. I consider that a practice because it's a very intentional, like, oh, I'm quiet. And it's not, I guess, a form of prayer, right? But it's ritualistic in that anytime I find myself in this particular kind of peace, I'm just having a conversation with God. I do, we have basic prayer rituals and things like that, but no real solid practices. We're open to trying new things and exploring and seeing what kind of things stick.
Yeah.
How about you? I want to know about your practices.
Well, something that I've been trying to do of late is just like, I did this last night it helps me really, like, as I think about the next day, is think like, what is one thing I was grateful for that day and one thing I'm looking forward to, like, the next day.
That's
so
awesome.
I feel like it helps me go to sleep at a minimum.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I've really tried to be more into prayer of late. So, like, being that I'm not in like full-time ministry right now, one thing that I try to do on Sunday mornings is just say a quick prayer for like the pastors I know who are in ministry or will be preaching. So obviously, as we're recording this, it's July 19th. So obviously, like last Saturday, Sunday, I was praying a lot for my clergy friends.
Yeah.
Thinking about them and their messages they're going to have to preach in light of the events with Trump. Indeed. But so that's something that I've been trying to work on of late.
I love that. I've been finding kind of like a Lectio Divina style with poetry, like little short poems like Rupi Kapoor or Ross Gay. They'll just read a little poem and then you find something spiritual in that. And that's been not, and I don't do it consistently, but I do find myself doing it a lot more. Like I'm looking for that connection to words and a message and things like that. So I really appreciate that.
This leads me into something we may or may not talk about here, but I noticed this as I was like, and it kind of came up in conversation, hopefully an episode that will air before ours with Rebecca and Simon Peter, who's a Methodist-based church consultant. But we're talking about, I think, the importance of religion. And I imagine you as sociology work talk about this a lot. But I was thinking about this Sunday as I was in church myself, thinking like singing these songs I didn't really feel like singing. Like how much like it's like, to me, I think about it as like a discipline or like a going through the motions. It sounds terrible, but going through those motions kind of like gets you in that, I don't want to say mood or spirit, or kind of like I wouldn't just like jump up and be like, oh, I want to sing praises to Jesus because I'm grumpy today. Yeah.
Right.
But doing that motion gets me into like, okay, I can do this.
Yeah, actually, we're going to talk about this later.
Yeah.
But we do this in our sacred listening tools, Future of Faith. That's one of the very first things we do is that intention setting, because it sets a tone. It's a signal to your, to your practice, to your brain, to like set the tone and the energy for the space, which is exactly what you would do with a song. Like sometimes it's just you need those words to connect to that moment. So it's our intention setting part. Yeah.
This is good. Let's keep going. So let's talk about your work. Megan, what's your title?
So I am the co-founder and executive director of Future of Faith.
Okay.
My co-founder is Dr. Josh Packard, who has been on this show before, and folks know him in the space.
Yes.
He and I have worked together for over a decade now, and in various capacities. And the executive director part of my title is that we turned Future of Faith into a nonprofit. And so somebody had to do that operation stuff. And that's where I come in. You know, he's the face.
Yeah.
He's the one that stands on the stage and
You're doing the real
talks
work.
it out. I would not say that. I think he's got it harder, but, the two of us together, have done, you know, this kind of work for a long time, and decided to shape it into something really, really kind of niche and based on all the things that we've done together for the last 10 years. So, Future of Faith is the culmination, like the next step of the work that we've done over the last decade. We're both sociologists and researchers. He's a sociologist in religion. I study group dynamics and social interactions in organizations.
Yeah.
So the two of us together kind of have that. We were the originating staff of Springtide Research Institute, which studies the lives of young people ages 13 to 25. He was the executive director. I was the head of research. And there we were collecting the largest data set about young people and religion in the country. And we were moving into this place of, it was useful. Like we would never do anything that wasn't useful. But we needed to take it a step further and really make it something that people could use in their local context. And so he and I were already talking about moving into this place of, what would it mean to have information that's hyper local and relationship based so that you can respond to your direct context? Like, it's great to know what's happening with young people in the larger context in the world. Of course, we always need that. There's loads of data about that. But what would it mean to like take these skills of information gathering and pattern recognition and like give it to a minister so he can use that in his local context? So Future of Faith is the result of that.
Yeah.
It's the dream work. Like, we got to this place of how do we use sociology? How do we help folks use sociology in a way that's accessible? So yeah, we create, listening tools. So our sacred listening tools are both a theory and a process that we use to help people do sociology in their local context. And I can explain more about that.
Yeah. Let's start with some of what you learned from Springtide, from your work there with researching young people. Shout out here to my Canadian co-host, Martha. Shout out Martha here. She'll pronounce it this way. Like, when we think about the nuns, we think about Gen Z. That's Martha, Canadian non-American. Shout out there. I guess they all say it Gen Z, not Gen Z. So let's talk about the challenges with that Gen Z, you know, whether it be the nuns, not so much the nuns, but certainly that younger generation. What are we seeing, broadly speaking, in church attendance and participation or lack thereof?
Yeah. I mean, if you're in ministry at all, you feel the challenges that are happening. And those are confirmed, you know, like the nuns have been growing for a long time. They've kind of leveled out. You know, there's not a continual uptick of people declaring themselves as nuns, but that is basically like they don't have a religious affiliation or they don't claim a religious affiliation. But what we're finding is that doesn't mean they don't have faith. It just means that they're not directly affiliated with something. So that's a challenge in and of itself. Like, they don't want to directly affiliate. But the reason for that is that they don't trust institutions the same way that they used to. When I was growing up, I just explained you just did it.
Right.
There is no more, you just did it. They don't trust institutions in the way that makes them connect or feel like they belong to something. And so they find something else in that faith world that they do belong to. Gen Z is one of the most diverse populations of young people. It is the most diverse population of young people we've ever seen. And so you can't treat it like a monolith. So building up institutions to respond to this diversity of this generation, it doesn't work. You need to be able to speak to their experiences and find other ways to connect to them in order for it to make a difference. That's the biggest challenge. As far as attendance goes, I think it's the wrong conversation, right? I mean, attendance matters. It's always going to matter to the institution. But the conversation we really need to be having is, how do we connect with the people to make them feel like they'll belong to the institution? Not how do we change the institution to help the young people? Let's
stay on that.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking about a church that I'm doing pulpit supply for, and that's a challenge that they're facing is how do we what they're grieving. Why can't we get young people to participate? So it's very much that question that them and many churches are facing or wrestling with is how do we get people to participate in the institution? Certainly that's how the institution has been structured. The metrics, right, have been incentivized.
Right.
Is getting people to participate in the institution.
Right.
So let's talk about why, or I guess you kind of said why American Christianity needs a shift in thinking. Talk more about like what you said there about that shift in the reversal of, rather than forcing the institution or people to conform to the institution, trying to get people more or the institution more to conform to what people are needing.
We know we need institutions. That's not a secret. But we used to be able to rely on them for everything. Like you knew where to find young people because they were just in the institution. But with that declining trust and the kind of declining trust in, authority, you can't just assume that they're going to show up. And, changing the narrative around like, why can't we get them to show up?
Right.
Why are they not coming in the doors?
Right.
The flip of that is that we need to start focusing on relationships, right? So the way that if you think about how you even attach to an institution now, it's a person first. It
is.
You're not walking through the door of some, unknown institution and being like, this is where I belong, because it represents a thing. Instead, you're walking through the door because you had coffee with somebody that cared about your life for a moment. Now, again, this is why Future of Faith was built, because that sounds daunting. It's like, how do you do that at scale? How do you, you can't have coffee and know the life of every single person that you're trying to draw into the institution. And we can get to that later.
Yeah. I'm like, well, don't tease it out too soon.
But I think that the adjustment in thinking about, relationships come first. And how do we do relationships in order and then once they're in the institution, then you can start, then you can teach them, then you can help them understand, and you can have conversations, you can develop further relationships, but it has to start with that connection piece first. It's not
I mean, I appreciate for sure two things you said there, like not being anti-institutionalist. I feel like this is a broad brush, but I feel like real sociologists are like recognize the value of institutions. Y'all are not just like, pure deconstructionists. Two, I think it's interesting, like what you said there about the relationship, because I'm thinking about how that relationship can be formed. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm thinking like that relationship could be formed on social media, like seeing clips of a pastor or somebody at the church can build a relationship. Maybe not the best way, but that could be, yes.
It's a start, for sure.
I think even in like mainline or progressive church circles, there's this idea like if we can just like, this is going to sound harsh, but like run up a rainbow flag, people are just going to start running in our door.
Right. Which is only partially true. The rainbow flag helps feel as though there is a connection, but they're still not going to, like, unless there's a gateway in.
Yeah.
They're not just going to rush into your institution. Yeah. Focusing on, you can't just keep, especially this generation, they don't respond to institutions the same way. So you have to be able to find another connection point.
So in Josh's book, I was seeing on your website, he writes that faith is a conversation. And I was intrigued by that verbiage.
Yeah.
Talk more what y'all.
So he wrote the book.
Yeah.
I can't speak to what was in his head. But I know that for me, faith is a conversation because, faith is inherently, believing in something that you don't have proof for, right? So, it's always been a conversation. It's a way to lead with questions instead of certainty, which leaves the door open for the ability to find out if there's a different way of thinking about something. And it's instead of having firm truths and having the answer, it's about questions instead of answers. And especially this generation that questions everything, they're more inclined to be interested in a faith life if they feel like they're allowed to be curious about it instead of just having to have the answers or having the answers told to them.
Yeah.
So it's more of a way of, like my faith is developed by listening, right? By understanding new ways of thinking, by being open to it being something more.
What I think is powerful about this too, and I've become a big fan of Andrew Root. I'm not sure if you're familiar with his work.
Andrew, yeah.
Okay. I've become a big fan of his, and I can't remember which book it is, but he talks about in one of his recent Ministry in a Secular Age books about the importance of testimony. So I'm thinking through that in light of this conversation. Like if we're sitting together in a group, we may be sharing some BS. If we're sitting together in a group sharing conversation, like there's going to be what we might call testimony in that group conversation. Like sharing like, boy, this was a really tough week.
Yeah.
Or sharing like, I had this moment where I was completely whatever, and sharing some testimony. And Root talks about like, it's in those moments that we can recognize through others' conversation. He calls it testimony, God's presence in our midst. So that's where I really appreciate this importance of conversation. I want to ask another follow-up question, but let's come back to that.
Okay.
You write that, or excuse me, you don't write, but you all make the point that relationships based on listening are the only way back for churches. And again, that seems hard, if only because churches so much have been trained in like the marketing scheme, the mass homogeneous unit principle, all these kind of like church growth tools.
Right.
And relationships based on listening are really hard. I mean, I think frankly it's the only way back for our nation, but that's a broader conversation.
Yeah, it is.
Tell me why y'all think that's the only way back for churches.
Oh, it's the one. I mean, in the research that we did with Springtide and in everything that we've done since then, listening is the thing that moves the needle. It's the one thing that changes everything. In the principle of Josh's principle of relational authority that he talks about in the book, it's essentially, you can still be an expert in the space, but the person that you're having a conversation with isn't going to trust what you're saying unless you're also demonstrating that you're hearing and relatable and listening to that. And that was the one thing that we found consistently, is that listening led to high levels of trust.
Yeah.
And so, in this super low trust world, you need high trust tools. You need to be able to build tools to build trust. And relationships are the only way to do that. Now you're right. It is daunting to think about doing it at scale. Which again, we have tried to kind of tap into the solution for that. But you can't understand, like you were just talking about testimonial and in the question about faith being a conversation, listening to that testimonial not only helps you understand and trust the person across from you because they're telling something sacred about themselves, but that testimonial may be vastly different than my experience.
Right.
And so understanding that there are that many different kinds of purview toward like people's faith experiences, or like getting something out of hearing somebody's testimonial and thinking like, I've never thought of it that way. It's the only way to trust, because you're demonstrating that your story is something sacred and unique to yourself, and like might be relatable to mine too. So yeah, the relationships are, again, in all the research that we've done, we've shown that relationships are the key to building trust again, and that trust is how we build the church.
So we've kind of talked about where I guess the idea came from. Well, let's dive into more about the sacred listening tools.
Yeah.
Maybe let's start with just kind of like the broad concept, what it looks like.
Yeah.
Speaking.
So, sacred listening is at its core, it's a theory and a process. And so the theory is three main parts. The first one is Imago Dei. We are all sacred. Now in secular spaces, we refer to this as like, we are all made of star stuff. So it's in places where, especially in conversations with young people who've don't even have the language of faith. Sometimes that resonates really well. But basically we are all of the same, universal stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And when you put yourself on that level with another person, it's really easy to feel that love, right? Because you're the same. So it starts with Imago Dei. And then, now we are not theologians. Imago Dei is
Sure.
like our baby theological way into this conversation. And then the second component is communication studies, which we use alignment. So, people have different ways of knowing, of different ways of communicating. So aligning your communication style, and the most simple rudimentary example that we give is the difference between introverts and extroverts.
Right.
Understand how people communicate.
Okay, are you an introvert or extrovert?
I am an introvert.
Okay, we're going to survive through this interview. We're going to tough it out and then go to our corners. I'm sorry.
Right, we're going to need to recharge later. Yeah, very, very much so. But so there's, aligning with that and identities and understanding where people come from. And there's that alignment piece. And then the third part of the theory is sociology. So it's pattern recognition. It's asking good questions, recording that information, and then using that information in a way that helps you build trust with another person. So, and then that theory is a 3-part process too. So we just take each section and make it, I wish I had a graphic that I could.
Right.
I do on the website.
But we'll have to make sure we include I'll make sure I include the video.
So we built this process to mirror that theory, and then in Imago Dei, we call that our intention section. I referred to this earlier. It's where you find some sort of a ritual or practice that puts everybody in the same space. You remind each other that the space is sacred and each other is sacred. And you do that very intentionally because it sets the tone for the whole rest of the process. And then, so each one of these tools is a different activity, but it's used these same principles to build them. So like we have, I'm gonna explain the activity and explain the process, but there's one that we have that's called Text to Connect, where it's literally just sending text messages to young people and then recording their responses. So the second section in communication studies is ask and record. So you ask good questions and then you record, you literally write down what they're saying and you need that information. So in the Text to Connect exercise, we're asking, how was your day? And you ask that every day. And you get an emoji and you record that emoji and then and then the next part is you sense the pattern. So you might find that somebody's had a really hard time on, at a certain time of day and they send you a bad emoji and you're like, I really need to follow up with that person. But then the magic of all of that in these activities is that you can use that information to scale relationships.
Okay.
So you've learned in the information, the pattern you've collected in this group of students that you've been, or people, whoever you're talking to, that somebody is, feeling like they're having a hard time with a parent. And you can connect them then with somebody that in your circle. So the sphere is really like helping make connections to those people so that you don't have to keep all of the information in your head. You have relatable information that you can use that builds trust and is intimate and you're building a relationship, but then you can also bring other people in to help manage those relationships so that you're not doing that alone. We just recently built an activity for a group where the young people are asked, about the 30 things that they want to do before they're 30. And it's a way to suss out their dreams and get to know them really well. And you can imagine the amount of connections. Like say a young person tells you they want to record a podcast.
Yeah.
Well, then I would connect them to you.
Yeah.
And then you could, so there's this nature of communal ministry that's built around the scaling relationships. So.
Yeah. Well, I want to talk more about this when we talk about implications, but I think what's interesting about that is when I think about the future of the institutional church, it seems like what is the size that's going to struggle the most is the 150 person church that I think used to be at least when I was growing up, the church,
right?
The standard church.
Yeah.
Now it seems like the mega church, because they're basically corporates, and at scale, to use that term, can do it. And the really, really small church can do it.
Yeah.
So I think certainly from a pastor's perspective is the biggest challenge has been you've alluded to is I can't keep track of 150 individuals.
Yeah.
So talk more about how your methodology, your system can really help with that.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is the recording, like finding some sort of a system to record. And even if it's something small, just a touch point, because, you know, we say listening, we mean deep listening, but we also mean paying attention.
Mm-hmm.
Like they could tell you something about Tuesdays, right? And you pay attention to that person needs attention on Tuesday. And then, you know, you have a staff member that's around on Tuesdays and you might be able to. So like, again, we fully recognize that churches are always under-resourced.
Right.
Like I'm doing enough research to know that that's true. But there's enough resources that you can not hand off relationships, but like share the information enough that person you gathered information from knows they're being heard because other folks are asking about it. Or, you know, you do something very small and simple, like reach out to them on a Tuesday to see how they're doing. It feels very daunting, but it's more about like gathering information that can be used in little ways and sharing the load. And that's enough to build trust and connection. And
I'm thinking like ideally it's a situation where the pastor or the clergy person is not necessarily doing the bulk of the, because I'm imagining, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I'm imagining a situation where I'm recording or I'm engaging in conversation. Someone shares like, they just lost a pregnancy, for instance.
Yeah.
So whether, you know, that whoever that person be, you ideally, right, would have information from previous conversations. Mm-hmm. Would there need, so, I mean, the ideal situation would be to connect the new person with the old person. Would there need to be, I guess I'm thinking like, when you think about confidentiality, how do you handle those situations when it's something sensitive, like a lost pregnancy, a medical diagnosis?
Yeah, it's
a tragedy,
really at that level. I mean, especially when we're talking about relationship versus something like FERPA, right? Or something health related. But like in that instance, it would be a simple message of, thank you for sharing this. I have a friend that can help. Do you mind if I share your contact with information? I mean, it could be no, right? Okay. And that's fine too. Yeah. But like with sensitive information, my husband is a youth minister and recently had a young person share something very private with him. And it was in a group. I mean, it was in one of these listening sessions. Right. But he said, thank you for sharing. I appreciate your vulnerability in this space. And then later he followed up and after the group said, hey, you know, I recognize this was a hard moment for you. Do you mind if I connect you to somebody who's experienced something similar? And she was super grateful. Yeah. And like, he didn't hand off that relationship. He still has that trust, but that person can now attend to that. So, but it was exactly that same kind of thing.
So that's where you talk about scalable, to use that term.
Yeah.
Because it's not just in this instance, your husband doing all the work of like, I don't know, how many kids are in his youth group, for instance? Like
15. Yeah.
Okay. So
I mean, for this one, yeah.
But even still, if he's going to provide, I mean, there's only like 5 days, so 7 days in a week, and he hopefully only works 5, right? So even if he's meeting with a kid every 5 days, or every day of the week,
right?
Which we know is impossible,
right?
Practically speaking. And obviously not scalable, because if it gets to 30, there's no way he can even get to every kid in a month.
Yeah.
It becomes scalable. And I hate using that business term, but I think it makes the most sense. It
does. Yeah.
Manageable. I don't know what a better term would be, but it makes the most sense. Like it becomes a way to maintain connection.
Yes.
And I think to build deeper connections or group connections, whether it be in the youth group, maybe it's like, I don't know, with a member of the church too, right? You could build, because I think that's when I was most recently working with youth, that was the thing that I was so desperately trying to figure out, is to connect. Like the youth kids would come, their parents would drop them off.
Yeah.
But then like they really didn't have any connection to like the Sunday morning worship.
Exactly. Yep. So we actually, we've built a few activities and they're on the website about, like the scaling part of the activity is to like, say they've done, they've made like an art project all together. Or there's one where we literally build like an online community, and then you invite the church community into that so that you're creating those cross-connected networks. And you make it 5 people out of 50 but that's still 5 more people that are now leveling that and building that network of belonging within the community. We have one where we build like a gallery art walk, and then we have the community come in and do that same kind of project with them, so that they feel that same kind. They have, conversations about identity and things like that, so that the community understands the group better, and then you can make those connections a little bit easier. That is exactly what it's all about. It's about removing, and this actually gets to implications a little bit.
Yeah.
It's removing that like central sage on the stage, preaching from the pulpit focus, and turns it into like a networked community engagement of people that are doing life together. Like that's the shift.
I mean, speaking of sustainable, like to me, that's so much more sustainable than the singular focus.
Yeah.
If only for one, like if my only point of contact in the church is with you,
right,
and you're senior lead pastor, and you piss me off, like I'm gone.
I'm gone, right?
Right,
exactly. And it removes all other variables for reasons why you would stay. What if that guy leaves? Then you've lost somebody, or a whole family.
Right.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
So it's branching out those relationships a little bit more.
So this leads to something else I wanted to ask about when we think about implications.
Yeah.
Is again, church, for lack of a better word, especially when people think church, they think that highly structured Sunday morning worship experience. And I know that differs obviously somewhat depending on your tradition.
Of course.
Certainly in a more evangelical traditions, it's sort of more laid back, right? There's, I don't know what, if your church identifies in this tradition, it's the 3 songs, the announcements, the message, the closing song.
Yeah.
In a more mainline church, it's a call to worship. It's passing the peace. It's so there's more
familiar rhythms, right? Exactly.
But it's still very like structured, and at most, whether it be in an evangelical context, which is like, go say hi to your neighbor, or in a mainline context, let's pass the peace. There's not really a lot of opportunity for that networking, that cross connection. So I've been wondering, as I think about this myself, like, do we need to reimagine like the Sunday morning worship experience? Maybe like where like I thought about like, maybe one week you have like a real structured like rally sermon, but then like follow-up weeks are like based on conversation. Like, have you all thought about what this has implications for as far as the Sunday morning experience?
Yes and no. I mean, I think it's hard to even talk about this without thinking about that. I mean, we have our objective is not to change Sunday mornings necessarily, but I believe that by doing this, it will inherently, I'm a sociologist, so build the systems and systems affect what happens.
Yeah.
I believe that if you change this, it will change.
I wish I had my notes. I write that down because that's so true. Anyway, I'm sorry.
It will change Sunday mornings organically. Listen, I don't want any pastors or priests out there to hear that this is we are not jeopardizing their role is still crucial. The expertise, the work and the study and the care and the compassion that, goes into being pastoral will always be needed. You need somebody who's going to be able to help, with questions, not always have the answers. Like your expertise will need to change.
Right.
It will need to be more of a conversation. But I think by the nature of developing these like deep community, interconnected bonds it will inherently change the way that Sundays work. Because again, if you're not just going because you want to hear what the one guy that is saying, but you're going because there's a group of people that all feel curious and all feel this joy of being together, like you're more inclined to come. And that will will just by proxy change the way Sundays work. So again, like that's not our key objective. Short of that becomes more attractive to young people. Attendance may grow if you build a community that people want to be part of. So, I will change Sundays in that I don't know. I do think there's something very comforting about the ritualistic traditions of a Sunday, and that will maybe never go away, but the dynamics will shift.
Sure.
The pastor will become the expert in the space to help guide or coach
Yeah.
versus teach at. And the people will feel more trusting of the things that they say. And, so yeah, I think that's how it changes.
Let's flesh this out just a little bit more.
Sure.
If only because like I've gone to seminary, invested many years
Exactly,
money in this, many friends who have.
Yeah.
Phillips Seminary, shout out, sponsor of the show. I'm thinking about, I've heard it said, and I know I've heard it said even at Phillips, like the role of the pastor as like, what it's often said, prophet, priest, and pastor, I think needs to change. Something like community organizer, something, I forget the third thing is.
Mm-hmm.
What, I don't know if you've heard that before. I'm just curious, like, does it resonate, if any? And I didn't flesh it out real well in that. But to what you were saying too, I think matches with what kind of I've heard, that there needs to be this shift from, like you said, there's the order.
Yeah. It resonates with me substantially because I think it's happening already. And I think that's a lot of the tension that folks in leadership are feeling. Like you come out of seminary and you expect it to be this, right? Or you expect to be this.
Yeah.
And what you really are is mental health professional.
Right.
And community organizer.
Right.
And all of these things for which you are not equipped.
Yeah.
But I think if again, I am not a seminarian. I did not go to seminary, full disclosure. And I'm not trying to change all of, theological schools, but I do think that there is, a guided direction that we need to take more toward relationships and networking and community building up front, while you're also learning to be the expert in the space and how do you lead a congregation. So yeah, I mean, I do think there is a shift towards that, but it's it's already happening due to the nature of how, relational dynamics and the structure of the church is changing. It's happening. And that's where that they're not equipped. And so that's the tension and the frustration that folks that are investing in that seminary experience.
And correct me if I'm wrong here, but I have the sense that someone could do the sort of training you're advocating for quicker and cheaper than seminary. So you could start with this, like get into the space. And then again, I don't want to diminish the importance of seminary. Like I think we've both seen the danger of folks with poor theological training.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't want to diminish, but
you don't want untrained folks leading as experts in this space.
But I think it could work like as an apprenticeship model, which I think there seems to be some energy around that even in secular spaces.
Yeah, I think so too. And there's a lot of continuing education programs, even that, I know Princeton does a lot of it where they offer additional supportive, like the intermediary parts that don't necessarily fall into the purview of seminary, but give you that additional boost to be able to support outside of the
like we still need those institutions. Obviously.
Exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. For sure.
Anything else you want to say? I think this has been a good conversation, but before we take a break, any other, something I've missed you want to point out?
No, not really. I want to plug Future of Faith only in that, there's a lot more information about the theory and the process on the website. And we build these custom tools to match your context. So, activities or types of things that you might need for your space. We do that, to help you make connections in your area. Like everything from an LGBTQ youth group in Florida to, we're working with a group doing TBRI, the trust-based in ministries, which is very cool. So yeah, that's all. I just wanted to kind of say, if you want to know more about it, for sure, it's there. And it's really difficult to explain the theory and the process, without a visual, apparently. So we'll have to go on the website and look at it.
I'll make sure we put the YouTube in the show notes. And the white paper that I'm excited to read, when might that be out?
Well, I don't know. We've just actually been told that we wrote a paper about about listening and the power of listening and how this is going to change relationships. That will be published in the Journal of Moral Theology.
Oh,
we just found out that we got that accepted. And then we're going to use that and a lot of the other we're doing an internal research project, about the impact of listening, and a number of other things that are going to kind of culminate into that white paper. So to be determined.
Okay.
But we'll have more stuff out for sure.
Okay.
With more of the research and the actual data and stuff.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
It's coming.
All right, let's take a quick break.
Okay.
We'll come back with some closing questions.
Sounds good.
All right, we're back with Megan Bissell. I feel like I'm saying that wrong. Bissell.
Bissell.
Okay.
I'll take it any.
Okay. So, big questions. You can take as seriously or not as you'd like to.
Okay.
If you're Pope for a day, what do you want to do? What does that day look like for you?
Well, first of all, I would be a woman serving in the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
So I would be very feminine and make a real big deal about being a woman in the Catholic Church. And I think the other thing that I would do, I would make no decrees. I would change no rules. I would just spend the whole day embodying kindness,
Okay.
love as much as possible. Because I feel like if you're the person chosen by God
Yes.
to be in that role, and I had that opportunity, all I would want to do is just like pour out as much goodness as the world could take in one day. Be like, this is what it's supposed to be about.
I like that. I like that. A theologian or historical Christian figure you'd want to meet or bring back to life.
Oh, Rachel Held Evans.
Yeah.
I miss her. I actually firmly believe, had she still been around and with Future Faith moving in the way that it is, we would be friends. Also, I like her friends, like Sarah Bessie and Nadia Bowles-Weber. I really like them a lot.
Yeah.
Rachel did a lot of really important work for inclusion in the church. And again, was that embodiment of love. So I would love to meet Rachel Held Evans.
I feel like I've used this before. I feel like she's like this generation's Rich Mullins.
Yeah, for sure. She's excellent. I think that we lost her way too soon.
Yeah.
But
rest in peace.
I know.
What do you think history will remember from our current time and place?
Oh, this is so hard. Hopefully not as much as we think.
Yeah.
I think that the division, the polarization is going to be very noteworthy. And the disconnection and all of the, obviously COVID, but that's all the same story. It's all polarization and disconnection and how hopefully they will remember how we bring everybody back together.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah.
Because we're living the disconnection part. In my lifetime, part of my goal in the world is to figure out how to bring people back together, even little bits at a time. So hopefully that's what happens.
That's kind of your hope then.
It is my hope.
Hope for the future of Christianity.
Yeah. In addition to, I just really want Christianity to be a place of wonder and joy and curiosity. Again, I know it was at one point, right? And, I have experienced that as a young person where, again, my parents fostered that and I was very lucky to have that. And they fostered in this organic way of just ask questions and be curious and find the fun and joy. Like, wouldn't you rather live in a world where there's a loving God and teaches us, and then what we get from that is meaning and purpose and joy and love and all of that, than not? Like I would. Yeah. So that's what I want. Like, how do we make Christianity that place where that hope of that's the world we live in? Yeah. That's what I want.
Yeah. All right. Plug the website. Plug the website again.
Futurefaith.org. And you'll find on there our sacred listening theory and tools. The tools are all downloadable. We started out we were hoping that this was just going to be a gift to the church. And that we were, to help ministers make these connections. It has since developed into a lot more than that. We're doing research with mission-aligned organizations to help them move their missions forward. Josh and I are both researchers. So, we have a listening and relationship-focused research method that's also on the website. You can see more about that. And honestly, to find me, just email Megan@futureoffaith.org or Josh. He doesn't mind either. Josh@futureoffaith.org. We're very accessible. We like to be that way. And, a big part of what we're trying to do here is build a community, of people who largely feel isolated in the field. And so reach out, ask questions. Let's do stuff together.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you making your way down to this space.
I'm glad I saw it.
Yeah.
And, I'm from, county, which does High Plains Library, and we do libraries right. So I got to see this one, which is great.
Yeah. So we both got to take a little trip to Fort Lupton, Colorado. So always leave folks with a word of peace. So may God's peace be with you.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on the Future Christian Podcast. The Future Christian Podcast is produced by Resonate Media. We love to hear from our listeners with questions, comments, and ideas for future episodes. Visit our website at future-christian.com and find the Connect with Us form at the bottom of the page to get in touch with Martha or Lauren. But before you go, do us a favor. Subscribe to the pod to leave a review. It really helps us get this out to more people. Thanks, and go in peace.